The Zeno brothers, namely Nicolò and Antonio Zeno, were Italian noblemen from Venice, living in the second half of the 14th century. They were brothers of the Venetian naval hero Carlo Zeno. The Zeno family was an established part of the aristocracy of Venice and held the franchise for transportation between Venice and the Holy Land. During the Crusades, Zeno is the Italianization of the Venetian surname Zen. Letters and map. Nicolò and Antonio are notable for a number of letters and map published in the year 1558 by one of their descendants, also named Nicolò Zeno. This descendant was a historian with other published works on the history of Venice. The letters, allegedly written by the brothers around 1400, describe a voyage of exploration that they say they undertook throughout the North Atlantic, under the command of a prince named Zeno. The letters and accompanying map are controversial and are regarded by at least one historian as a hoax, either by the Zeno brothers themselves or by their descendant who wrote a narrative which he said was based on what was left of letters that he had torn up as a boy. The letters are divided into two parts. The first set contains letters from Nicolò to Antonio. The second are letters from Antonio to their brother Carlo. The first letters tell you how Nicolò set off in 1380 on a voyage from Venice to England and Flanders. Evidence exists that such a voyage took place, and that Nicolò returned to Venice around 1385. In the letters, Nicolò describes being stranded on an island between Great Britain and Iceland called Friedlander, which is described as being larger in size than Ireland. By chance Nicolò is rescued by Zeno, who is described as prince who owned some islands called Portlander off the southern coast of Friedlander, and who ruled the Duchy of Sorrent, or Sorand, southeast of Friedlander. It has been suggested that Friedlander is in fact a stand-in for the Faroe Islands, with individual islands mistakenly merged into a single landmass by Nicolò the Younger. Although Friedland and the Faroe Islands both appear on several maps, many hundreds of miles apart, Nicolò invites Antonio to come to Friedlander with him, which he does, and stays for 14 years. Under Zimny's direction, Antonio attacks Islander, which is ostensibly the Shetland Islands, as indicated by the similarity of place names mentioned in the letters. Zeno then attempts to attack Iceland. After finding it too well defended, he attacks 7 islands along its eastern side: Bress, Talus, Bros, Ascant, Trans, Memant, Dambuk. All of these islands are fictitious, and alternate interpretation finds that in transcribing the letters the Zen brothers' descendant mistook a reference to Islander for Islander or Iceland, thus accounting for both the presence of those superfluous islands off Iceland and the mysterious absence of an equal number of islands off of the Shetland Islands. Further evidence in support of this claim is the similarity of place names in the Zeno Islander to modern-day Shetland. For instance, the island of Bressifer, Bress, and Danneberg sound near Lerwick for Dambuk. Zeno then builds a fort on Bress and leaves Nicolò in charge of it. Nicolò makes the voyage to Greenland and finds a monastery with central heating. According to the alternate interpretation cited above, in which the travelers had yet to leave Estlander, the subsequent destination is in fact Iceland, explaining the presence of geothermal heating and other observations. Zeno receives word that a group of lost fishermen from Friedlander have returned after an absence of over 25 years. The fishermen describe having made landfall in the far west in unknown countries called Estataland and Drogia. Inspired by the tales of the fishermen, Zeno undertakes a voyage to the west with Antonio in charge of his fleet. To the west of Friedlander, they encounter a large island called Icaria, which does not exist. According to the letters, the inhabitants of Icaria greet them before they can make landfall. Only one person among the Icarians is able to speak a language that Zeno understands. The inhabitants state that visitors to the island are not welcome and that they will defend the island to the last man if need be. Zeno sails along the island looking for a place to make landfall, but the inhabitants chase him and Zeno abandons the effort. Sailing west, they make landfall at a promontory called Trin on the southern tip of Ingrulander. Zichma likes the climate and the soil, but his crew find it inhospitable. The sailors return home with Antonio, while Zichma stays on to explore the area and build a town. Controversy and criticism. The account of the voyages given by the younger Nicolò continues to attract debate. Some of the islands they allegedly visited either conflate existing locations or do not exist at all. Research has shown the Zeno brothers were occupied elsewhere when they supposedly were doing their exploring. Contemporary Venetian court documents place Nicolò as undergoing trial for embezzlement in 1394 for his actions as military governor of Modonon, Coron in Greece from 1390 to 1392. He wrote his last will and testament in Venice in 1400, many years after his alleged death in Frilander around 1394. There is disagreement about the brothers' whereabouts at the time of the supposed voyages, with some readings of archival records placing the brothers in Venice at that time. Andrea di Robilant suggests this interpretation is in error. According to the Dictionary of Canadian Biography online, the Zeno affair remains one of the most preposterous and at the same time one of the most successful fabrications in the history of exploration. Di Robilant disagrees, stating that the younger Nicolò was a first-class smuggler, not a fable-monger, whose inaccuracy was the result of second-hand retelling that still contains much of the truth of his forebears' voyages.